Picture this scenario, October 1216. Within the cold, damp walls of Newark Castle, the air hangs heavy with smoke, mildew, and something far worse, the sweet, rancid stench of disease. In a chamber lit only by flickering torches, a man writhes on a sweat-soaked pallet. His body convulses, groans spilling from his lips with every spasm of agony. This is no ordinary man. This is the King of England, Lord of Ireland, Duke of Normandy and Aquitaine, Count of Anjou. John, son of Henry II, brother of Richard the Lionheart. But here, in his final moments, he is not dying the noble death of a king. There is no glorious battlefield, no sword clenched in hand, no loyal court at his bedside. Instead, his body is collapsing in on itself, torn apart by dysentery. A violent, bloody flux so brutal that a chronicler later wrote, "The king's insides seemed to be bursting outward." This is the end of John Lackland, the most reviled king in England's history. A pitiful, ignominious death for a man remembered as the villain in Robin Hood's legend, so hated that in over 800 years, no English monarch has dared to name their son John again. But this is not merely the tale of a gruesome death. It is the story of how a tyrant's reign collapsed in a way so grotesque that many believed it was divine justice. And in a twist of irony, his squalid death would save his kingdom and alter the course of history forever. To understand why his end was seen as cosmic punishment, we need to understand the man himself. John was cursed from birth. The youngest of Henry II's 4 sons, he came into the world when there was little left to inherit. His father, with bitter humor, nicknamed him Jean Sans Terre, John Lackland. The title stuck and defined his entire life. A prince with nothing, forever clawing after power he could not hold. His hunger for power revealed itself early. While his older brother, Richard the Lionheart, was away on the Third Crusade, John stayed in England scheming in the shadows. He spread rumors that Richard was dead, forged alliances with his brother's enemies, and even tried to crown himself king. When Richard was captured and held prisoner on his way home, John did everything possible to keep him imprisoned. It was a betrayal so blatant that it shocked even hardened medieval lords. Yet Richard, once freed, forgave his brother. But in 1199, fate finally gave John what he craved. Richard died from a crossbow wound in France, and John, the overlooked younger son, seized the crown of England. For the first time in his life, John had everything, and almost instantly he proved utterly unworthy of it. His reign was one disaster after another. First of all, he lost the empire his father had carefully built. Unlike Richard, John was no warrior. Where his brother had earned the title Lionheart, John was mocked as soft sword. Against the cunning Philip II of France, John fumbled and lost miserably. By 1204, Normandy was gone. Along with it, Anjou, Maine, and Poitou. Centuries of royal territories vanished into nothing. The humiliation was unprecedented. The vast French holdings that had made the Plantagenets the most powerful family in Europe had slipped through John's weak fingers. Desperate to fund his failing campaigns to reclaim them, John turned savagely on his own kingdom. He taxed England to the bone. He imposed scutage 11 times in just 17 years. More than his 3 predecessors combined. He imposed inheritance taxes, income taxes, taxes on trade, on property. But money alone was not enough. John ruled with a cruelty that went beyond greed. He extorted his barons, fining them for imaginary crimes, seizing their estates, and worst of all, taking their children as hostages. One story chilled even his ruthless contemporaries. Matilda de Braose, wife of a baron, accused the king of murdering his young nephew Arthur of Brittany, a rival claimant who had mysteriously disappeared while in John's custody. John's revenge was swift and horrifying. He captured Matilda and her eldest son, locking them in a dungeon at Windsor Castle. They were given a single sheaf of oats and a strip of raw bacon. 11 days later, guards found mother and child dead from starvation. The chronicler wrote that in her final madness, Matilda had gnawed the flesh from her dead son's cheeks. This was John's message to all who dared oppose him. But John's arrogance did not stop with his barons. He dared to challenge God himself. A bitter dispute erupted over who should be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Pope Innocent III, refused to bend to John's will. In retaliation, John seized church lands. The Pope's response was devastating. In 1208, he placed all of England under interdict. Church bells fell silent. Churches were locked. No mass, no confession, no weddings or Christian burials. For 6 long years, the people of England lived in spiritual exile, a kingdom cut off from God. Then, in 1209, Innocent escalated further. He excommunicated John himself. In the eyes of Christendom, the king was damned. By 1215, John had accomplished the impossible. He had united virtually every faction against him. The barons, the church, and the common people all despised their king. The barons rose in open rebellion, renouncing their oaths. They marched on London, and John, abandoned by almost everyone, had no choice but to negotiate. On June 15th, 1215, in a meadow at Runnymede beside the River Thames, history was made. The barons presented John with a document, a Charter of Liberties. It would become known as Magna Carta. Today, Magna Carta is remembered as the cornerstone of liberty, a foundation for human rights worldwide. But in 1215, it was something far more practical, a laundry list of grievances from furious nobles. It was not about democracy, it was about restraining a tyrant. Yet hidden within its 63 clauses were revolutionary ideas. The king was not above the law. No free man could be imprisoned without trial by his peers. Taxes required consent. John, seething but cornered, placed his seal on the charter. The barons believed they had won. They were wrong. John had no intention of honoring Magna Carta. In his eyes, he had signed under duress. He was a king by divine right. How dare mere barons dictate terms to him? He appealed to Pope Innocent III. Their feud had ended after John surrendered his kingdom as a papal fief. Now he begged Innocent to void the charter. The Pope agreed. He declared Magna Carta null and void of all validity forever. For the barons, this was the ultimate betrayal. John had not only broken his word, but enlisted a foreign power to crush their liberties. War was inevitable. England plunged into brutal civil conflict. And soon the rebels took an even more shocking step. They invited Prince Louis, son of the French king, to take the English crown. In May 1216, Louis invaded and marched on London. King John was now a fugitive in his own realm. The final months of John's reign were frantic, a desperate scramble across a collapsing country. In October 1216, John was in East Anglia, attempting to move his forces north. He faced a treacherous crossing, a tidal estuary known as the Wash, infamous for its shifting sands and sudden tides. John, reckless as always, crossed first with his army and made it safely to the other side, but his baggage train, slow and heavy, followed behind. And this was no ordinary baggage. Inside were John's riches, his hoarded money, his jewels, and most precious of all, the crown jewels of England, including the legendary crown of Alfred the Great. As the wagons creaked across the mudflats, the tide turned. Sudden, surging water swept in. The sands shifted, swallowing horses, guards, and wagons alike. In moments, the entire baggage train vanished beneath the churning waters. The treasure of a king, the symbols of his power, the wealth wrung from years of ruthless extortion, was swallowed whole by the sea. To this day, it has never been recovered. It was more than just a material loss. It was a perfect metaphor for John's reign. Everything he had clawed, stolen, and brutalized his people to obtain was stripped away in an instant by forces he could not control. Devastated and humiliated, John pressed on to Swineshead Abbey. At the abbey, he indulged recklessly. The chronicles differ on the details. Some say it was peaches and new cider. Others claim it was pears and ale. Whatever the feast, it was too much for a man already exhausted. That night, the sickness began. It started with fever, then cramps so sharp they bent him double. Then came the dysentery. Dysentery in the 13th century was often caused by bacterial infection. It tore through the intestines, shredding their lining. The result was explosive, uncontrollable diarrhea, often mixed with blood and mucus. It brought raging fever, dehydration, and delirium. John was reduced to a helpless wreck. Too weak to mount a horse, his soldiers carried him in a litter toward Newark Castle. Every jolt of the cart was agony. On October 16th, 1216, John reached Newark Castle. By then, he was a dying man. For 2 days, he lay in torment. In brief moments of lucidity, he dictated a will. He named his 9-year-old son Henry as his heir. He confessed his sins. He begged forgiveness from God. But as the fever consumed him, he likely saw the faces of those he had wronged. He was surrounded by a handful of loyal attendants, but in truth, he died alone. Alone with his agony and his failures. On the night of October 18th, 1216, King John Lackland finally succumbed. The chroniclers recorded his death with grim satisfaction. They described the king consumed by torment, his body bursting from within. The image perfectly suited his reign, a man so full of poison and cruelty that in the end it destroyed him from the inside out. And then something remarkable happened. The death of a king saved his kingdom. With John gone, the rebellion lost its purpose. The barons had risen against him, not his 9-year-old son. Young Henry was innocent, untouched by his father's cruelty. Into this void stepped one of the greatest knights of the age, William Marshal. Marshal had remained loyal to John when nearly everyone else abandoned him. Now, as regent for the boy king, he acted decisively. He rushed Henry to Gloucester Cathedral, where the child was hastily crowned Henry III. The sight of a boy king, vulnerable and pure, softened the anger of many barons. Here was someone they could guide without bowing to a tyrant or accepting a foreign prince. But Marshal did more than that. He reissued Magna Carta. This time, the charter was stripped of its most radical demands, but its core principles remained intact. No free man could be imprisoned without trial. Taxes were limited. The king was bound by law. The effect was transformative. The rebel barons suddenly had everything they claimed to be fighting for. Their alliance with Prince Louis crumbled. Why serve a foreign invader when they could mold an English boy king? Within a year, Louis's forces were defeated and driven back across the Channel. The rebellion dissolved. The catastrophe of John's reign had ended. His son's reign had begun, built on the very document John had tried to destroy. Here lies the great irony of John Lackland. His life was a parade of humiliations. He lost Normandy. He lost the loyalty of his barons. He lost the trust of the church. He lost his treasure, his dignity, and his people's love. He died in filth and torment, remembered as a villain and a failure. Yet his death secured his dynasty. His tyranny birthed Magna Carta. His failures gave rise to principles that would echo for centuries. Though he fought with all his might against the rule of law, it was his reign that cemented its necessity. Though he despised the very idea of constraint, it was his legacy that gave the world one of history's most enduring symbols of liberty. John Lackland, the king who lost everything, unwittingly gave the world a gift that could never be erased. When John drew his final breath, few mourned him. To his barons he was a tyrant, to the church a sinner, to the common people a greedy, cruel ruler. Yet his death planted the seed for a legacy far larger than his miserable life. At first, Magna Carta seemed fragile. It was a peace treaty forced upon a reluctant king. Yet after his death, William Marshal reissued the charter under young Henry III, and that changed everything. In doing so, he transformed Magna Carta from a temporary truce into something far more enduring, a symbol of limits on royal power. What began as a desperate demand from angry nobles slowly evolved into something greater. Over time, it was no longer just about baronial privilege. The language of liberty spread, and the principles hardened into tradition. Centuries later, Magna Carta's echoes would reach far beyond medieval England. In the 17th century, English lawyers invoked it during their struggle against the Stuart kings. In the 18th century, American colonists cited it as they declared independence. Thomas Jefferson himself pointed to Magna Carta as inspiration for the Declaration of Independence. And in the 20th century, echoes of its spirit appeared in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What John signed under duress at Runnymede became a cornerstone of global liberty. And that is perhaps the greatest irony of all. The man who fought so bitterly against limits on his power became the accidental father of constitutional law. But history has not been kind to John personally, and rightly so. His list of failures is staggering. He lost Normandy, shattering his father's empire. He bled his people with endless taxes. He quarreled with the Pope. He betrayed his barons. He starved his enemies. He may well have murdered his own nephew. He was petty, vindictive, and suspicious. Chroniclers wrote of his paranoia, his cruelty, his insatiable greed. He alienated everyone, from the greatest lords to the humblest peasants. His death matched his life, undignified, miserable, and despised. It is no wonder that legends turned him into the villain of Robin Hood. No wonder that in over 8 centuries, no English monarch has dared name a son John again. Yet his story should not be forgotten. Because history is not only written by the victors, it is also shaped by the failures, the villains, and the tyrants whose mistakes carve new paths forward. John's reign is a reminder that unchecked power corrupts both ruler and realm. His cruelty sparked rebellion, his arrogance bred resistance. His tyranny forged a charter that would outlive him by centuries. He tried to silence liberty. Instead, he gave it a voice. When we look back at John Lackland, we do not see a glorious warrior or a wise king. We see a cautionary tale. A man who wanted everything and lost it all. A king who died in filth and pain, remembered not for what he built, but for what collapsed around him. And yet in the wreckage of his rule, something extraordinary emerged. Magna Carta, the principle that no one, not even a king, is above the law. That is his true legacy. Not one he intended, not one he would have celebrated, but one that shaped the very foundations of modern governance. In the end, John Lackland, the king who lost his lands, his treasure, the loyalty of his people, and finally his life, left behind something greater than he could ever have imagined. His empire vanished, his reputation rotted. But the idea born from his failure survived. It survived his dynasty, it crossed oceans, it shaped nations. And so history remembers him not with honor, but with irony. For the worst of kings left the best of legacies. The man who lost everything gave the world something it could never lose. If this story moved you, and you want to discover more forgotten truths from history, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with those who love history like you do. Only through knowledge can we learn from the past. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next video.